Hello there and welcome to the Sleepy Alchemist. Tonight, we step into a world of dim lanterns, soft footfalls on creaking beams, and the powdery scent of charred oak and strange herbs. Imagine a medieval loft where glass vessels glint in the shadows, and somewhere below a donkey sighs in the stable. This is a story about smoke that waits, smoke that listens, and perhaps whispers back. And you probably want to know this. Most real alchemists spent more time making medicines, perfumes, or dubious elixirs than they ever did turning lead to gold. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind pressed at the crooked shutters as Lena tiptoed into the alchemy loft. It was well past curfew, and the last ember in the hearth below had gone dull, leaving the rafters in a muffled hush. Her lantern flickered across dusty shelves stacked with ceramic jars, ground antler, sulphur flowers, even a small tin labelled Pulvis Draconis, which she strongly suspected was just brick dust. Her master, old Ferric, was snoring in the side room, but she'd memorized the squeaks of every board to avoid waking him. Tonight, she wasn't after ingredients. She was after the smoke. The workshop had its own smell, vinegar, beeswax, and that faint tang of burning copper. When she lit the tiny oil lamp and placed a pinch of sage and salt onto the coals, the first tendrils curled upward. Normally smoke wavered lazily and drifted toward the cracked window. This time it rolled and paused, hovering as though sniffing the air. Lena crouched, hugging her knees, entranced. She had read in a battered manuscript that Egyptian alchemists once burned specific resins to awaken the air. Historians still argue whether that phrase meant ritual, chemistry, or poetic nonsense. Yet here she was, seeing the air respond. A shiver ran down her arms. A horse snorted in the street below. Somewhere a bell tolled for the night watch. The smoke trembled but didn't rise. "You see me, don't you?" she whispered. Her own voice startled her, slicing through the sleepy silence. She giggled under her breath. It felt ridiculous, talking to soot. And yet, the smoke did something new. It split into two curling streams, twining like braids. She could almost imagine a nod, a gentle acknowledgement. She leaned closer, hair brushing the floorboards. A faint warmth puffed toward her cheek, as though the smoke exhaled. It was the tiniest sensation, like standing beside the mouth of a sighing cat. She pulled back, heart racing. Medieval alchemy was always a strange mix of kitchen craft and superstition. Real texts from the 14th century instructed practitioners to boil urine, crush emeralds, and paint sigils on copper pots. Her master had once bragged that he'd seen an alchemist in Prague use crocodile dung as sunblock while stoking a furnace. Lena hadn't believed him until she found a footnote confirming that wealthy Egyptians really did try that trick. She smiled at the memory. Ferric's stories were half folklore, half unhinged chemistry lesson. The floor creaked near the doorway. Lena froze, snuffing the lamp with her fingers. For a moment the loft was pitch black, save the faint glow of cooling embers. Ferric's mutter rumbled through the wall. No footsteps followed. When she relit the lamp, the smoke had drifted closer, almost nose to nose with her. She swallowed. "I think we could be friends," she said softly. Her tone carried that lilt she used with stray cats. "I sit not here to banish you, or bottle you, just wondering." A tendril reached out and brushed her lantern's glass, leaving a foggy spiral like a fingerprint. For a dizzy heartbeat, she thought she heard a faint hiss, like steam sliding off a kettle, but stretched into a syllable. The rafters groaned. Lena eased back onto her elbows, the story of her day forgotten, the market trip, the dull lesson about distilling rosewater, the arguments over who should clean the pigeon droppings off the windowsill. All of it seemed far away now. She sat cross-legged, feeling the soft tickle of dust and straw beneath her slippers. The smoke pulsed in the low light, taking shapes she half recognized. A swan's neck, a question mark, maybe the outline of a key. She blinked, and it was only a coil again. "Historians would call this madness," she murmured, picturing some future scholar wagging a finger. or they sipped and argue over it in Latin footnotes. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the night watchman's lantern bobbed past the alley. Inside, time slowed. The smoke hovered, patient as though Lena had stepped into its world instead of the other way around. A final ember cracked in the brazier. The soft, hot scent of sage deepened, curling through her hair. A yawn tugged at her jaw. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about guild exams or Ferrick's rants about saltpeter shortages. She was thinking about this quiet companion who didn't rise like normal smoke. When her eyelids drooped, she whispered, "I sit'll come back tomorrow night. Don't sick go far." The smoke quivered once, almost like a nod, before stretching into a thin line and dissolving into the beams above. Lena slept late the next morning, her dreams a haze of curling smoke and soft hissing syllables. Ferrick's bellow woke her. "Girl, you left the brazier open." His voice rattled the rafters like loose shutters. She scrambled down the ladder, hair sticking out in 3 directions. The old alchemist stood by the workbench, his tunic speckled with yesterday's soot. He waved the little brazier like an accusation. "It wasn't stick open," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. I was just burning sage for nothing, unless you sitch trying to bankrupt me." He thumped it onto the table. "Sage isn't sit-free, and the neighbours already think we sitch are running a witch sip's loft." Lena chewed her lip, deciding whether to tell him about the smoke that had paused, that had brushed her lantern glass like a curious hand. In the daylight, it felt impossible. She swallowed the words and busied herself with sweeping the floor, sending up soft motes that danced in sunbeams. Ferrick, for all his grumbling, was a man of contradictions. He could memorize obscure Arabic treatises on Mercury, but he once spent a whole afternoon chasing a runaway chicken with tongs. He'd studied under a wandering scholar from Bologna, who claimed to know the secret of making Greek fire, though he admitted, usually after a few mugs of ale, that the recipe mostly resulted in singed eyebrows. As she swept, Lena thought about her smoky encounter. Maybe she'd inhaled too many fumes, or maybe this was the thing every apprentice eventually experienced. A line between the real and the almost real blurring in the flicker of coals. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists genuinely believed in the consciousness of their ingredients, or if it was all theatre to impress patrons. That afternoon, Ferrick sent her to the market. The winter sun was thin and sharp, and frost crackled under her boots. She passed the fishmonger with his barrel of eels, the candle-maker with honey-scented stubs, and the usual gossip knot of weavers who eyed her soot-streaked sleeves and whispered. In her pocket, Ferrick's coin clinked alongside the scrap of parchment where he had scrawled cinnabar, alum, vinegar, fresh lard. At the spice stall, she hesitated. Bundles of dried herbs hung like upside-down brooms, their scents jostling in the cold air. A little braid of white sage caught her eye. She traced it with her finger. "You want that?" the merchant rasped. He was missing a tooth and wore 3 hats, one atop another. "For smoke, yes." Lena blinked. "How did you—" "Because only smoke people buy that," he said matter-of-factly. "The ones who talk to their kitchens at night." He gave a wheezing chuckle and wrapped the braid before she could protest. On the walk back, her pulse thrummed. Was he joking, or had he seen something in her face? That evening she didn't wait for Ferrick to snore. She crept up early, long before curfew, and set the new sage by the brazier. The loft felt different after sunset, more hollow, like a bell waiting to be rung. The city outside was quieter than the night before. Even the dogs seemed to be holding their breath. She lit the coals. This time she mixed in a pinch of ground juniper, remembering a marginal note in one of Ferrick's manuscripts. Juniper draws the subtle spirits. The smoke rose slowly, then stopped. It was like watching a thought form in the air. The tendril curved toward her, a lazy spiral that hovered at eye level. Her heart flipped. "I came back," she whispered. "I said I would." The smoke pulsed once, then drifted in a small circle, enclosing her like a soft bracelet. Lena had read that alchemists in Baghdad, around the 9th century, experimented with distilling rosewater to perfume royal halls. Some chroniclers claimed they left bowls of steaming herbs in palaces to invite the heir's memory. Historians still argue whether this was science, superstition, or just early aromatherapy, but tonight she felt like the air really could remember. "I don't even know your name," she said, then laughed softly. "Do you even have one?" A twist of smoke stretched upward, then bent into a loose S shape. She gasped. She guessed. "Sister?" The smoke tightened into a curl, as if nodding. A warmth spread through her chest, and a sleepy giggle escaped before she could stop it. Down in the street, a wagon clattered over cobblestones, and somewhere a man argued with a stubborn mule. Up here, Lena and the smoke twined in silence. It brushed the end of her braid with a feather-light touch. She decided to test her courage. "Do you understand me?" The smoke coiled into two loops, like a sideways figure eight, and then melted back into a single stream. "I'll take that as a maybe," she whispered, grinning. Ferric coughed in his sleep below, and the floorboard beneath her knee squealed. She froze, waiting. Silence returned. By the time the last coal crumbled to grey, Lena was half asleep on the loft boards. The smoke lingered longer than before, hesitant to leave, and as she drifted into dreams, she thought she felt it settle around her shoulders like a shawl. The next morning dawned with a sky the colour of old pewter, and Lena's head throbbed faintly from smoke and lack of sleep. Ferric was already stomping around downstairs, muttering to himself as he weighed lumps of lead on the brass scale. "Girl," he barked without looking up, "we sit been hired to brew a cordial for Lady Rasfeld Sip's cough. If she doesn't stop hacking, her husband will swear we sit poisoning her with fumes instead of curing her." Lena nodded, pulling her hair into a crooked braid. She still felt that drowsy, secret warmth from the night before, like an ember under her ribs. Ferric sniffed. "What sips that look for?" "Nothing. Just thinking about smoke ratios." "Smoke doesn't matter in a cough cordial. Liquids do." He squinted at her, then went back to scribbling in his ledger, tongue between his teeth. She spent the morning pounding dried figs and licorice root in the mortar, while Ferric barked instructions. As the pestle rose and fell, she thought of the smoke's soft shape, its wordless acknowledgement. "Sister." By midday, the workshop smelled of honey, vinegar, and crushed herbs. Outside, the church bell tolled a slow hour, and a cart full of firewood rattled past the open shutters. Ferric paused to stretch his back, cracking it like old timber. "You know," he said, "in Salerno they distill this mixture twice, call it an elixir, and charge a duke-sip's ransom." He grinned, showing a gold tooth that looked absurdly cheerful against his sooty face. "We do it once and hope no one dies." Lena chuckled under her breath. Historians still argue whether medieval elixirs ever cured anything, or if the whole trade was part medicine, part theatre. Some recipes from that era even recommended adding crushed emeralds, claiming the stones aligned the humours. Ferric, thankfully, stuck to ingredients that wouldn't break teeth. After lunch, bread smeared with last year's plum jam, they lit the fire under the copper still. Water hissed. The copper clanged, and soon a fragrant steam drifted into the rafters. Lena couldn't help staring at it. It curled lazily, then split into two tendrils. One of them wavered toward her face, pausing just shy of her nose. Her pulse quickened. "Not now," she begged silently. Ferric was right there, poking the fire with his iron tongs. But the smoke was insistent. It lingered, swirling in a pattern almost like a spiral shell, a shape she felt rather than fully saw. Then, with a sly flick, it zipped upward, hiding in the darker shadows of the rafters. Ferric followed her gaze. "Bats?" he grunted. Maybe," she said, forcing herself to return to the pestle. When dusk fell and the cordial cooled in stoppered bottles, Ferric sent her to deliver one to Lady Rasfeld's kitchen door. The castle loomed on the hill, windows like amber eyes against the violet sky. Lena trudged up the path, her basket bumping against her hip. The kitchen maid opened the side door, a girl with freckles and a nervous laugh. "Oh, you sit the alchemist 'tis one," she said, eyeing the bottles. "Hope it works." She coughs like she got a mouse stuck in her throat. Lena left quickly, heart hammering. On the walk back through the village, she noticed smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. Most of it spiraled straight up, indifferent to the world, but here and there, a tendril seemed to hesitate, just for a blink before joining the rest. Back in the workshop, Ferric had already snored himself into oblivion on the cot. Lena crept to the loft. Her fingers trembled as she lit the brazier, mixing sage with a pinch of dried marjoram this time. The smoke rose and stopped halfway. "You came," she whispered. The tendril coiled around her wrist, feather-light, almost ticklish. Her chest tightened with delight. "I saw other chimneys tonight," she murmured. "Do you belong to me, or could you go anywhere?" The smoke twitched in a shape she could almost read as maybe. She leaned closer, her braid sliding over her shoulder. "Ferric can see you, can he?" The smoke tightened, as if hugging her wrist. "I wonder if any of the old alchemists talk to you," she said. "Like Albertus Magnus, or that French one who swore he turned lead into gold and then vanished. Historians still argue whether he faked his death or just ran out of town." The smoke pulsed faintly, as if amused by her ramble. She thought of the merchants' words at the market, the ones who talk to their kitchens at night. "Maybe I stim one of them now," she said softly. "And you stim my sister of smoke." The tendril spun a small ring in the air, then slid up toward her shoulder, settling there like a warm scarf she couldn't touch. And for the first time, Lena felt less like an apprentice, and more like a conspirator in some ancient secret the world had mostly forgotten. By the following week, Lena had developed a ritual. Each night, once Ferric's snores rumbled through the timber beams and the street dogs had given up on barking at the moon, she would light her little brazier, grind a few herbs and wait for the familiar grey sister to unfurl. The smoke rarely disappointed her. It curled and swayed, coiling around her fingers like a patient cat. Sometimes it rose to the ceiling, sketching shapes against the lamplight. A spiral, a crooked ladder, something that might have been a bird. Other nights it stayed low, looping in slow figure eights over the table where she scribbled her notes. Lena started keeping a ledger, just as Ferric did for recipes, but hers was full of observations no medieval alchemist had ever admitted to. Night of the waxing moon, smoke refused to rise, formed circle on table. Added dried rosemary, smoke flicked like a candle flame 3 times. She wasn't sure if she was imagining the patterns or if this was real communication. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists genuinely believed in elemental spirits or simply used the idea to justify strange lab accidents. But whatever the truth was, Lena felt less and less like she was playing pretend. One night, Ferric almost caught her. He woke up coughing, stumbled to the loft and scowled at the haze. "Are you trying to asphyxiate yourself?" he wheezed. "You sir'll wake up a corpse with black lungs." Lena waved her hands innocently, just testing how sage burns, for air purification. He squinted but trudged back downstairs, muttering something about reckless apprentices. The next evening, Lena was more cautious. She waited until the moon was high and the village had gone silent. She burned only a tiny pinch of lavender, and the smoke emerged thin and shy. "Hello again," she whispered. "I need to ask you something." The smoke swayed, listening. "Why me? Why now?" It hesitated, then split into 2 threads, which spiraled together and apart like a slow dance. Lena bit her lip. "Is that a yes? Or are you showing me something?" The threads entwined tighter, forming a helix before fading into the air. She remembered reading in Ferric's oldest manuscript, well, sneaking peeks at it, that some alchemists believed smoke carried fragments of the soul of whatever burned. If that was true, then tonight she was talking to the ghost of lavender. A friendly ghost, but a ghost nonetheless. The next day she had to run errands in the market, and the sight of cooking fires and forge smoke made her shiver. Had she been ignoring these voices her whole life? A fishmonger laughed at her distracted face. "First time smelling cod guts, girl?" She mumbled an excuse and bought the herbs Ferric needed. Hyssop, angelica root, and on impulse, a handful of dried mulleins. The vendor leaned in conspiratorially. "Mullein smoke keeps spirits friendly," he said. "Also my grandmother swore." That night, she tried it. The smoke didn't just swirl, it stretched toward the window like a finger pointing. "You want me to go outside?" she whispered. It wavered. Her heart fluttered. She lifted the brazier carefully and crept to the yard. The night air was damp, the stars blurred by a drifting fog. The brazier's smoke rose, mingling with the natural mist. And then, In that fragile darkness, the smoke leaned, not up, but sideways, toward the alley that led to the old mill. "You're leading me somewhere," she breathed. The alley smelled of wet straw and mouse droppings. A stray cat darted past her feet. The smoke hugged the wall, forming little pulses, as if encouraging her forward. At the mill's edge, she saw it, a broken chimney pipe still faintly warm. The smoke she carried mingled with a remnant wisp escaping from inside, and for a moment the two tendrils wrapped each other like dancers, greeting after a long separation. Then a faint sound reached her ears. A soft poosh, almost like a sigh. Her chest tightened with wonder. "Are there more of you?" she asked. The smoke spiraled, and a thin strand from the mill drifted toward her brazier, nestling into it like a bird returning to a nest. Lena walked back to the workshop in a dream, the brazier cradled like a secret. In her loft, she watched the reunited smoke linger over her pillow until she drifted into sleep, feeling less like a lonely apprentice and more like a keeper of a hidden council. That night, she dreamed of chimneys whispering across the village, exchanging gossip only smoke could understand. Somewhere, she suspected, her grey sister was laughing in curls and loops, waiting for her to ask the next question. By morning, the brazier was cold, and the smoke had long since slunk away into whatever corner of the world smoke retreats to when dawn comes. Lena woke with a crick in her neck, her cheek pressed to her ledger. Across the page, a single curlicue of ash had fallen, almost like a calling card. She brushed it into a tiny pouch she'd begun keeping, a collection of what she half-jokingly named smoke souvenirs. Ferric was already stomping around below, hammering copper lids back into shape. He looked up as she descended the ladder. "You look like you slept in a sack of flour," he grunted. "Long night reading," Lena muttered. It wasn't exactly a lie. By mid-morning, Ferric sent her to the monastery library, a place that smelled of beeswax and old vellum. She needed to fetch a copy of Liberignum, the Book of Fire, which he swore held a formula to reduce smoke from the forge. As Lena fingered the stiff, curling pages, one illustration caught her eye, a woodcut of a robed figure speaking to a wisp rising from a brazier. Beneath it, in clumsy Latin, were the words Vox Vaporis, the voice of vapor. Historians still argue whether such marginalia were serious alchemical instructions or mere monkish doodles. Lena, however, felt a prickle down her spine. On the walk back, she noticed smoke in all its forms. The baker's chimney exhaling bread-scented puffs, the glassblower's shop breathing little serpents into the sky. For the first time, she thought she caught whispers in the shifting grey ribbons, as though the entire town was humming in a language just beyond hearing. That evening, she climbed to the workshop loft early. "All right," she whispered, as she lit mullein and sage together. "If you can show me things, show me again." The smoke rose, then hesitated, then split into two ribbons that circled each other like shy dancers. Slowly one ribbon slanted toward the corner where the unused distillation coil sat gathering dust. "You want me to use the coil?" Lena asked. The smoke twitched. She hadn't dared touch the glasswork since the infamous copper-sulfur incident that left her eyebrows singed for a week, but now she arranged the coil carefully, set the brazier beneath it, and watched as the smoke threaded itself through the spiral tube. Condensation formed along the glass like dew. When a droplet slid down and sizzled on the brazier, the smoke flared, curling in satisfaction. "You like that?" Lena murmured, half amused. There was no verbal answer, of course, but the ribbon of smoke looped a heart shape in the air. Quick, imperfect, but enough to make her laugh softly. She decided to test it. "If I ask a yes or no question, will you answer?" The smoke coiled slowly, almost in thought. "Okay, are you a spirit?" A lazy spiral drifted up, then split into two. "Two, does that mean yes and no?" The smoke pulsed once, like a nod. "Well, that sip's comforting," Lena said under her breath. Half a spirit, half, what, warm air with attitude. That night she also tried something Ferric had offhandedly mentioned, a pinch of powdered amber in the brazier. According to one of his treasured manuscripts, medieval alchemists believed amber's smoke could carry prayers more directly to heaven. The result was a golden haze that shimmered in the lamplight, and Lena could swear she heard the faintest tusk sound, like static on a far-off radio. Her heart pounded. "You're louder now," she whispered. A gust of night wind rattled the shutters, and she almost toppled the brazier in surprise. When she steadied it, the smoke had formed a perfect ring that hovered for a moment before dissolving. "That sip's amazing," Lena breathed. Then from below, Ferret called out, "If you burn down my workshop, I will haunt you as smoke." Lena froze, then stifled a laugh. The evening ended with her ledger full of strange sketches, loops, rings, spirals, and a creeping sense that she wasn't simply playing with smoke anymore, she was collaborating with it. The final surprise came as she snuffed the brazier. For the first time, the last tendril of smoke didn't drift upward or sideways. It curled directly toward her face, brushed her cheek like a soft kiss, and vanished. Lena went to sleep smiling, half wondering if she should start greeting smoke on the street like an old friend. The next morning, Lena's smile lingered like a secret perfume. She spent the day moving through the town's rhythm with an extra lightness in her step, though she still kept her little smoke pouch tucked close. Ferric was too busy haggling over tin prices to notice the subtle glow in her face. That was fine. Lena wasn't ready to share this with anyone. Not yet. When evening fell, she headed up to the loft again, the ritual now as comforting as pulling up a blanket. Tonight, she was determined to learn something concrete, something to prove this wasn't just exhaustion-fueled daydreaming. She prepared the brazier with care, layering mullein and pine resin as if tucking in a child. As soon as the first tendrils unfurled, Lena whispered, "Hello, Sister Smoke." The grey ribbon paused mid-curl, then began to spin in a slow, deliberate helix. "Okay," she said softly. "Except I'm going to try something different tonight." From her satchel, Lena retrieved a shard of lapis lazuli. Ferric had won off a travelling trader. Alchemists of the 14th century believed that ground lapis carried celestial resonance, though historians still argue whether that belief came from Arabic translations or just wishful European superstition. She dropped the shard into a small iron spoon and held it over the flame. The smoke changed instantly, shading blue at the edges. Lena blinked in surprise. The thin spirals began to sway, as if a silent music guided them. "You like colors," she murmured. "Or you want to show me colors?" The smoke split into 3 threads and twisted them together into a braid. Then it unwound again, fluttering toward the shuttered window. "Out there? You want to go outside?" It pulsed once in that strange, almost nod way. Lena hesitated. Ferric would scold her to the ends of the earth if she let a live brazier near the open air, but she could carry the spoon of burning resin. She set the brazier on the loft floor, grabbed the spoon carefully, and nudged the window open. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of peat fires from distant cottages. The smoke slithered outward like an animal freed from its cage, curling against the stars. For a moment, Lena thought she saw the outline of a bird, a raven, maybe, wings spread wide before the wind tore it apart. "Wow," she whispered, "you've been wanting sky all this time." In that brief hush, she swore she heard a faint hum, like monks chanting in the next valley, or perhaps the sound of the river below. Medieval texts sometimes spoke of aerial voices, claiming smoke and steam could carry messages from angels or demons. Most modern scholars dismiss those as allegories for chemical reactions, but in that quiet, Lena wasn't so sure. Suddenly, the smoke curled into the shape of a hand, or something like a hand, pointing toward the old bell tower at the far edge of town. "The bell tower," Lena whispered. "What sips there?" The smoke trembled, but did not form another shape. Slowly it drifted back inside, as if retreating into the warmth of the brazier. That night, Lena drew the smoky hand in her ledger, along with the distant bell tower. She remembered being a child and hearing that the tower's crypt once held scrolls sealed by monks who feared their knowledge might tempt the devil. Quirky village lore insisted that anyone who opened them would smell sulfur for 7 nights straight. As Lena settled down, she muttered to the empty room, "Are you trying to lead me to secrets or to trouble?" A faint wisp rose from the dying embers and coiled once, then broke apart, leaving the air still. The question hung over her all night. By dawn, she had resolved to visit the tower, though she couldn't quite say why her chest tingled with equal parts dread and delight. The bell tower loomed like a frozen sentinel at the far edge of the village. Lena had walked past it dozens of times in her life, yet never with the weight of the smoke's gesture pressing at her chest. Today, clouds clung low, giving the stone walls a damp sheen and making the carved gargoyles look as if they were weeping. She carried a small pouch of resin and her iron spoon tucked deep in her cloak. She could almost hear Ferrick's voice echoing in her head. No experiments outside the loft, Lena. The guild frowns on that. But the smoke hadn't pointed toward the marketplace or the woods. It had pointed here, and when your sister speaks, you listen. The tower door was warped and stubborn, as if it had spent centuries sulking. Lena pressed her shoulder against it, until it yielded with a groan. The interior smelled of damp stone and old pigeons. She paused, letting her eyes adjust to the dim stairwell. "Okay," she whispered to the smoke pouch. "If you sips got something to show me, now sips the time." She lit the resin spoon, letting a tiny coil of smoke snake upward. In the chill air, the ribbon rose like a shy question mark. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then it swerved toward the stairway, curling along the spiral like an eager pet. The climb was slow and careful. Her footsteps echoed in the hollow chamber, mingling with the soft creak of the wind through the high slits. Halfway up, she spotted a relic, a rusted lantern inscribed with a cross and sunburst. Historical records mention that in the 14th century, towers like this sometimes doubled as watchposts, and lanterns were hung as primitive beacons. Historians still argue whether such lanterns ever served ritual purposes, though the idea of summoning divine light had its charms. "Are you a ritual place?" Lena asked under her breath, fingers brushing the metal. The smoke trembled but didn't dare to answer. She finally reached the top chamber, where the bell swayed gently in the draught, its bronze lip green with age. A scattering of feathers and twigs hinted that pigeons had claimed dominion here long before her arrival. And then she saw it. Behind the bell, a narrow archway led to a crawl space. Lena ducked inside, brushing cobwebs from her hair, and found a stone plinth no larger than a bread loaf. Resting atop it were two brittle scrolls wrapped in black ribbon. Her heart thumped so loudly she worried it might shake dust from the ceiling. "You weren't sick kidding," she whispered to the smoke. "Secrets." One scroll bore the seal of a crescent moon, the other a triangle within a circle. Lena had read about these in old guild books, symbols often linked to transmutation and the elusive aether, the hypothetical fifth element that medieval alchemists believed bridged the mortal and celestial. Modern scholars still debate whether these symbols indicated serious experimentation or just dramatic flair to scare off the superstitious. She brushed a layer of dust away and felt an almost electric thrill. Could these be instructions, spells, formulas for controlling smoke or listening to it? The smoke from her spoon formed a coil above the scrolls, like a cat settling into a lap. "You want me to read these, don't you?" Lena said, voice low, reverent. The coil flicked once, like a nod. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped the moon-sealed scroll. The parchment cracked softly, but held. Inside, lines of faded ink and peculiar illustrations danced before her eyes. A bell, a flask, a rising spiral, and in the margin, a crude sketch of what could only be a face made of smoke. Lena sipped, breath caught. The scroll sip script was in a hybrid of Latin and Middle High German, a messy combination typical of rural alchemists who copied from travelling scholars. One passage leapt out. "Invoke the anima fumus, that she may carry voice to ear and answer in likeness." She sat back on her heels, stunned. She had stumbled onto a recipe for exactly what she had already experienced, except the scroll implied it was intentional. A single pigeon cooed overhead, startling her into a laugh that she quickly stifled. Somewhere in the depths of the tower, the great bell gave a soft metallic shiver, though no wind had touched it. Lena felt that shiver run through her own ribs. "I think I've just met your grandmother," she whispered to the smoke. The smoke quivered in the candlelight, and for the first time, Lena swore she felt not just a presence, but a pulse. She carefully returned the scroll to its plinth, mind racing. Tonight, she would try the ritual, and maybe, just maybe, the smoke would speak more than gestures. The loft smelled of damp parchment and burnt sugar, the scent of Lena's previous experiments lingering in the beams. She closed the trapdoor behind her, locking the world out, and laid the moon-sealed scroll across her workbench. The smoke had slunk from her spoon and now drifted lazily near the rafters, like a cat demanding attention but on its own terms. She touched the scroll reverently. "Well, this is how I get answers, HM." In the lamplight, the diagrams seemed to twitch, as if they preferred candle flames to glass lanterns. Medieval alchemists, Lena remembered, often performed their work by firelight because they believed the element itself blessed the experiment. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or just the necessity of an age with no electricity. Either way, the light flickered warmly across the text, and her pulse matched its rhythm. The instructions were bizarrely poetic. Summon the sister of smoke with her drink of resin and bell, her ear of tin, her throat of hollow reed. Ask thrice, listen once, speak never to scorn. Hollow reed? Lena muttered, rummaging through her clutter. She found a piece of thin copper tubing, probably meant for distilling rosewater. Close enough. The ritual demanded a sequence. Heat the resin, collect the first smoke in a vessel, then channel it through the reed to a suspended bell. She wasn't sure if the little handbell from the market would count, but it was all she had. The great bell in the tower wasn't exactly portable. She arranged her tools, tongue between her teeth. When she struck flint to steel, sparks leaped, and the familiar smoky tendril began to rise. It wavered, coiling as if recognizing its role. "All right," she whispered. "Drink of resin." She spooned a pinch into the flame. Sweet, woody smoke blossomed, and the copper tubing trembled in her fingers. As the first grey curl funneled through the reed and chimed against the handbell, Lena felt the hairs on her arms lift. The bell gave a single note, soft, mournful, and impossibly long for its size. The smoke pooled above the bell, forming a loose sphere. It didn't rise further. It waited. "You can hear me, can't you?" Lena asked, voice barely more than a breath. The smoke twisted, slow and deliberate, and then a ripple passed through it like someone tracing a finger across water. She tried again, heart thundering. "Are you my sister?" The ripple repeated, this time forming a shape almost like a nod. Her stomach dropped and rose all at once. Somewhere in the back of her mind, the Rational Guild student scolded her. Smoke can't be a sister. It's particles, chemistry, convection currents, but the part of her that had spent years scrawling formulas by candlelight and collecting legends like pretty stones whispered, "Then why does it listen?" She glanced back at the scroll. A marginal note read, "Beware her patience. 3 questions, or she sulks to ash." 3 questions, Lena whispered. "All right, let's sit, not waste them." She swallowed, then asked, "Why do you listen to me?" The smoke trembled. This time, a thin strand uncoiled like a finger and pointed toward the other scroll with the triangle in circle seal. "Oh, you're cheeky," she said, and felt an odd warmth in her chest. She unwrapped the second scroll with care. The parchment was darker, maybe from soot. Unlike the first, it was mostly diagrams of flasks and bellows, annotated with symbols Lena recognized from alchemical shorthand: sulfur, aqua vitae, vitriol. One sketch caught her breath: a tall glass jar with a tiny cloud trapped inside, and below it the words Anime Domus, House of the Soul. Historians still argue whether these drawings were literal or metaphorical, she muttered, tracing the ink. But I sip and starting to vote literal. The smoke pulsed, then twisted into a shape almost like a spiral staircase. It pointed again, this time toward her largest glass jar on the shelf. "You want a house." The spiral contracted and expanded in what could only be excitement. "All right," Lena said softly, goosebumps prickling her arms. "Let's sit, build you a home." By the time she had set the jar, funneled the smoke inside, and corked it with a drilled stopper to allow the copper reed, her hands were shaking. The smoke didn't protest. It swirled happily in its new vessel, sometimes pressing against the glass like a curious animal. "Okay, sister," she whispered. "Tomorrow night, we sit'll talk for real." The jar hummed faintly against the wood. Lena blew out the lamp and curled up on her cot, heart still racing, knowing she would dream of grey ribbons and soft bells. The morning light seeped through the tiny round window, picking out every floating speck of dust in Lena's loft. She stretched slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her shoulders. Her gaze darted immediately to the workbench. The jar sat there, as calm and innocent as if it had always been a simple piece of glassware. But inside, the smoke drifted in lazy loops, perfectly content. It didn't rise, didn't fade, and most importantly, it didn't escape. "Morning," she whispered, the way you might greet a cat that wasn't entirely convinced it liked you yet. The smoke pulsed once, as if acknowledging her greeting. She grinned despite herself. Down in the square, the market bells rang, mingling with the low rumble of cartwheels over cobblestones. The town outside her little sanctuary continued, as if nothing unusual had happened in the night. But Lena knew better. She had created, or invited, something impossible. She flipped the moon-sealed scroll over, scanning the next lines. There was mention of feeding the sister smoke with breath and song, which sounded like either a charming medieval superstition or a very real rule she didn't want to break. She perched on the stool and exhaled gently toward the jar. The smoke swirled in response, curling like a ribbon toward her face. Emboldened, she hummed a simple tune, an old nursery song about the baker's lazy donkey. The smoke's loops synchronized with the melody, rising and dipping as if it were dancing. The sight sent a thrill down her spine, half wonder, half unease. "You like that?" she asked. A tight coil pressed briefly against the glass in what she decided to interpret as a yes. She leaned back, mind buzzing. Medieval alchemists often wrote that music could stir the spirits of certain concoctions. Historians still argue whether that was poetic nonsense or if they observed vibrations influencing reactions. Either way, Lena had just watched smoke waltz to a donkey lullaby. Her elation was interrupted by a pounding on the trapdoor. "Lena, are you alive up there?" It was Mira, the blacksmith's daughter and her oldest, really only friend in town. "Yeah, don't sit come up," Lena yelped, then softened her voice. I sipped 'em, conducting an experiment." Again, the mayor sips, starting to say you sit to turning his chimney bricks into frogs. That was one time. She heard Mira mutter something about weird girl and the creak of retreating steps. Lena exhaled in relief. If anyone else saw this jar, she'd have to answer questions she wasn't ready for. Returning her attention to the smoke, she whispered, "We need a plan. If we sit, you're going to—" "I don't sit, talk properly. I need to understand what you want." The smoke slowly morphed into a crude arrow pointing toward the town below. "You want to go outside?" It pulsed. "Absolutely not. They sipped probably try to bake you into bread or something." The arrow persisted. Lena chewed her lip. She had read that alchemists in Prague once claimed to summon air elementals into bottles, parading them through markets to prove their skill. Quirky as it sounded, one record mentioned the creatures being chased away with brooms when they startled the bakers. That story had always made her snort. Now it felt more like a warning. Still, curiosity gnawed at her. "All right, but only for a minute," she said, unstopping the jar. The smoke slithered out with surprising speed, curling up near the ceiling beams, then slipping through the open window. Lena hurried after it, heart in her throat. The town looked deceptively ordinary from above. Clay roofs, chickens pecking in the dirt, the smithy belching smoke. Her own little smoke sister drifted over the square, utterly ignored, until the bell in the chapel tower rang noon. The smoke froze mid-air, vibrating with the sound. Then, to Lena's horror, it started mimicking the bell's motion, looping in slow arcs. The chickens squawked. A few townsfolk pointed, shading their eyes. "Uh-oh," Lena muttered. "Witchcraft," someone shouted. The smoke darted back through the window, nearly knocking over a jar of lavender oil. Lena corked the vessel fast and ducked below the sill. Shouts rose from the square. Feet stomped on cobblestones. "Well," she whispered to the jar, trying to slow her breath, "you just got me accused of sorcery." Again. Inside the glass, the smoke formed a shape that looked suspiciously like a shrug. She buried her face in her hands and groaned. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. The trapdoor rattled again, this time harder. A man Sip's voice rang up. "Lena, of the loft, by order of the mayor, Open up. Her stomach sank. The smoke's jar vibrated on the bench, and she swore it was laughing. Lena's pulse thudded in her ears as the trapdoor rattled again. The mayor's voice was like gravel rolled in butter, rough, impatient, and a little smug. Lena, if you make us break this door, we'll fine you for damages. She glanced at the jar. The smoke swirled in a smug little spiral, utterly unhelpful. Shh, she hissed at it, as if scolding a dog who just tracked mud over the clean floor. Do I have to get the blacksmith? The mayor called, his sips already sharpening the crowbar. Lena scrambled around the loft, trying to sweep jars and scrolls out of immediate view. Some went under the workbench, others into a burlap sack. She kicked the sack into a shadowy corner, wincing at the clinking. The trapdoor gave one last threatening wobble. She sighed, tugged it open, and peered down into a semicircle of town officials. There was the mayor with his shiny bald head, Mira's father looking apologetic, and two guards trying not to cough in the rising scent of herbs. Good afternoon, Lena said, aiming for breezy but landing squarely on guilty. The mayor's sex gaze darted past her into the loft. We saw something. Bird, she offered weakly. That was no bird, muttered one of the guards. I've seen birds. That was squiggly. Smoke, the mayor said flatly, and it danced to the bell. Lots of smoke does that if you, spin your head quickly enough. She made a vague twirling motion. Nobody laughed. The mayor climbed up without invitation. Nose wrinkling, he sniffed at the air, eyeing the racks of herbs, the little furnace, the mortar and pestle still coated in a greyish sheen. You said been told, he said, that alchemical experiments need to stay quiet. The last time, my niece Sep's hair smelled like vinegar for a week. That was, technically, a perfume trial, Lena said. Historians still argue whether medieval perfume counted as sorcery, you know. The mayor gave her a look that could curdle milk. Historians are not the problem, neighbours are. Behind his back, the smoke pressed itself to the side of the jar, forming a mocking face with two round eyes and a big open mouth. Lena did not laugh. I said I'll keep things quieter, she promised. No public smoke ballets. You cert better, the mayor grumbled, hopping back down the ladder. One more complaint, and we silt to bring in the bishop. You know how he loves dramatic bonfires. The words left a chill in Lena's spine. Even if the bishop never actually burned anyone, the hint of it hung over every unconventional life like an anvil. When the officials clomped away, she sagged onto her stool. Congratulations, she told the jar. You cert, officially notorious. First week of existence, and already a public menace. The smoke stretched in a shape reminiscent of a crown, tilting jauntily. She rubbed her forehead. We need rules. If we sit to going to keep you a secret, you have to stop showing off, and you have to help me with my work, or this partnership is a disaster. The smoke twirled, then formed an arrow toward the furnace. You want more experiments? It pulsed. Fine, but something safe, safer than last time. She opened a new scroll, one copied from a 14th century recipe for golden water. It was really a mild aqua regia, acidic enough to dissolve coins if you weren't careful. Her voice dropped to a sleepy, sarcastic murmur, like a late-night host sharing gossip. You probably want to know this. Alchemy back then wasn't all philosopher's stones and shiny elixirs. Half the time, it was people boiling pea or vinegar, hoping for enlightenment. The smoke pulsed like it was laughing. She mixed the ingredients slowly, heat low, murmuring a tune. The smoke hovered above the flask, giving an occasional swirl of approval. Steam rose, tinged faintly gold in the candlelight. Then, without warning, the smoke darted down and wrapped itself around the vapours. The golden haze stayed suspended, like a miniature sun hanging over her workbench. Okay, that sip's new, Lena whispered. You eat steam now? The smoke separated the gold vapour into neat rings and spun them like juggling toys. Quirky didn't begin to cover it. She felt giddy. Historians still argue whether certain alchemists' notes about homunculi were symbolic or literal. Staring at a smoke spirit that could juggle chemical halos, Lena wondered if some of those scribbled legends weren't exaggerations after all. A knock at the window startled her. Mira was perched on the sill, eyes wide. "I knew you were up to something," Mira hissed. "And this time, I want in." Lena glanced at the jar, then back at her friend. She couldn't keep this secret forever, could she? Lena cracked the window wider, letting Mira swing herself inside with the ease of someone who had done this far too often. Mira landed softly on the wooden planks and sniffed the air. "It smells like lemon and coins," she whispered. "Are you making some kind of potion to make rich people sneeze?" Lena chuckled under her breath. "Close. I was trying for golden water, but," she gestured at the floating smoke rings, each haloed with a faint metallic shimmer. "It kind of upgraded itself." Mira froze, then leaned closer to the smoke jar sitting half open on the bench. The spirit coiled out like a cautious snake, forming an exaggerated sniffing nose before fanning itself into a shape suspiciously like a cat, stretching. Mira said flatly, "Your smoke has opinions." "It does more than that," Lena whispered, a soft ASMR-like cadence curling in the candlelight. "It listens, and sometimes it answers, though mostly with sass." The smoke rippled a halo as if tipping an invisible hat. Mira giggled, trying to stifle the sound. "You sir telling me you accidentally invented a pet cloud?" Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists ever made Telsa living smoke. "Sict," Lena murmured. "They called them sict, spiritus fumum, sict." Most scholars say those were just poetic descriptions of incense rituals. But this is definitely not poetry. The smoke twirled into the word high, the letters wobbling in the draft. Mira clapped a hand over her mouth. "This is insane. You have to show the whole town." "Absolutely not," Lena hissed, shaking her head. "You heard the mayor, one more complaint, and he will drag the bishop up here. And bishops and smoky sass spirits done sip mix well, trust me." The smoke puffed itself into a crude bishop's mitre, then wobbled as if doing a little jig. Mira doubled over silently laughing, clutching her stomach. "See," Lena sighed, "it seps a menace." For a while, they just watched it play with the golden steam. Then Mira's expression shifted to something thoughtful. "You know, if this stuff can hold shapes, could it carry things?" The smoke froze mid-spin, forming a question mark. "Like letters," Mira whispered conspiratorially. "You could send secret messages without paper. No one could ever catch you." Lena considered the idea, her voice dropping to a sleepy, musing rhythm. Medieval alchemists used carrier pigeons. But imagine a messenger no one could shoot down. That sip's actually brilliant. The smoke zipped in a loop, then mimed writing with a tiny vapor pen. "Okay, you like the idea too," Lena said, "but we need practice. Something simple, harmless." She grabbed a scrap of parchment and wrote, "Bring honey cakes," before setting it on the bench. The smoke curled around it, inhaled or whatever the smoky equivalent was, and a ghostly replica appeared in the air. Then, with a puff, the original parchment was untouched, but the floating copy drifted lazily toward the open window. Mira gasped. "It sips like having the world sip's sassiest carrier pigeon." Lena felt a thrill. Her mind spun with possibilities, deliveries, secret notes, maybe even safe trade of alchemical instructions without risk of prying eyes. Of course, a tiny voice whispered that this was the sort of thing that historically got alchemists accused of consorting with demons. Historians still debate whether early chemical cryptography, like sympathetic inks and disappearing messages, counted as magic. Watching her smoke buddy parade a message across the village sky would probably land squarely in the heretic column. She tapped the jar. "Only practice at night, and no flying near the church." The smoke gave a wobbly thumb up, though it somehow managed to look mischievous anyway. As Mira leaned against the wall, the candlelight glinted in her hair. "You realize," she said softly, "this is bigger than just experiments. Ysip got something alive." Lena swallowed. "I know, and if I can figure out why it listens to me, maybe I can figure out how to help it." The smoke stretched long and thin, brushing against her arm in a gesture that felt oddly like gratitude. For a fleeting second, the whole room seemed quieter, the golden haze reflecting in both girls' eyes. Down in the street, a dog barked, and a cartwheel clattered on cobblestones. Life went on, oblivious to the tiny revolution brewing in a hidden loft. Okay, Lena whispered, tucking the jar into a padded nook. Lesson 1 in smoke diplomacy is over. Tomorrow, we test your limits. The smoke settled like a sleeping cat, and the night folded around them like a soft quilt. Morning slipped in like a shy visitor, thin beams of light poking through the gaps in Lena's shutters. The smell of damp wood and old herbs clung to the loft. Somewhere down in the square, a rooster crowed a second too late to be useful. Lena stirred on her straw pallet, her mind already fizzing with ideas. The smoke was waiting in its jar, coiled lazily like a cat in a sunbeam. It pulsed a sleepy good morning, almost invisible in the soft light. Today, she murmured to herself, voice hushed and slow in that cozy YouTube host cadence, we see how far you can really go. She set the jar on her workbench and unlatched the shutters. Cool air drifted in, carrying the smell of wet stone and bread from the baker's downstairs. She placed a small copper coin on the sill. All right, my smoky sibling, Lena said. Fetch. The smoke hesitated, then snaked out into the light. It wrapped the coin like a ribbon and gave a dramatic wiggle before floating the copper in lazy circles over the street. Below, a few early risers paused and rubbed their eyes as if they'd imagined it. Lena winced. Not so flashy. The smoke dropped the coin onto a barrel, then zipped back inside like a scolded puppy. It morphed into a sad little rain cloud. Hey, don't set pout, Lena whispered, reaching a finger into the jar. That was actually incredible. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists ever truly managed levitation experiments. Most likely, any floating objects were explained by hidden wires or simple magnetism tricks. But watching her smoke juggle a coin with no strings attached, that was no parlor game. She grabbed a pear from her food basket. Let's try something heavier. The smoke twined around the fruit, straining. Its edges frayed and wobbled. Slowly, agonizingly, the pear lifted half an inch before plopping back into her hand. Okay, you have a weight limit, Lena said, amused, noted. Still, coins and notes are more than enough. She felt a giddy rush. This wasn't just fun, it was revolutionary. If she could refine the process, imagine the possibilities for trade, for messages, for mischief. A thought flickered. She could be the first in history to create a true courier made of air. Then came a faint tap-tap on the window frame. Lena froze. Mira's face appeared upside down, dangling from the roof like a cheerful gargoyle. Your smoke left me a note last night, Mira said in a stage whisper. It said, Dienerenchtus, Bienerengdi. So, I brought 3. Lena cracked up, muffling the laugh with her sleeve. Of course it did. Come in before someone thinks I stim harboring a roof demon. As Mira crawled inside, the smoke darted to greet her like an over-eager puppy. It formed a lopsided pastry shape and tried to nibble the air. You are officially the funniest thing in this town, Mira said, handing over a paper packet. They ate in companionable silence, crumbs sticking to their fingers. Between bites, Lena scribbled in her notebook. Test 1, coin, success. Test 2, peer, strain. Test 3, messages, flawless. She paused, tapping the quill. If I can bind the smoke to objects without exhausting it, we could scale this. Mira nodded sagely, mouth full. I volunteer to be your test audience forever. The smoke swirled into the shape of a tiny mirror, complete with a crooked braid, then bowed theatrically. Show off, Lena muttered fondly. Her next experiment involved tying a little silk ribbon to the coin. The smoke grabbed it and wobbled across the room like a drunk dragonfly. But it worked. A real delivery system in miniature. A shiver of excitement passed through her. This is it. This is the kind of breakthrough they would write about. If they didn't hang me first. Historians still debate whether secret alchemical breakthroughs were intentionally hidden or just lost to time. Watching her smoke dodge the rafters with its coin cargo, Lena felt certain that some discoveries were too strange to share in their own age. The sun climbed higher, and the workshop glowed in a haze of golden dust. The smoke's body shimmered brighter than usual, energized by the experiments. It brushed against her arm in a fleeting, warm, cool caress, as if proud. All right, she said finally, gathering the jar. Lesson 2 in smoke diplomacy, stealth. If anyone sees you flying coins around, we sturt both in trouble." The smoke formed a mock halo and tucked itself meekly into the jar. Downstairs, the bakery bell chimed, and the day carried on, blissfully unaware that history had just nudged forward in a loft above. By mid-afternoon, Lena was back at her bench. But this time she had a mission. Discovery was thrilling, but discovery that couldn't sit, survive, and secret was a short-lived triumph. She set seen too many folk tales, end with villagers holding torches and muttering about witches. The smoke sat in its jar, swirling lazily, giving the occasional ripple against the glass. "Stealth," she said, in that soothing, sleepy, friendly tone. "This is your afternoon lesson. We want you to be the world's sep's quietest secret." It wiggled like a shrug. She dimmed the shutters and lit a single beeswax candle, letting the smoky scent mingle with the herbal perfume of the loft. If she squinted, it almost looked like a cathedral bathed in incense, just without the choir, unless you counted the upstairs mice doing their midnight in the day routine. "All right, slip out and make yourself invisible," she whispered. The smoke trickled from the jar, hugging the corners like a shy cat. It hugged the beams, coiled under the bench, and then, poof, spread so thin she could barely see it. "Perfect," she said. "Now bring that coin back here, stealthy style." From somewhere near the window, the coin lifted, hovering, and then glided like a daydream toward her palm. No clinking, no dramatic spins. The smoke condensed just enough to plop the coin into her hand before retreating again. Lena grinned. "If we had this trick in a royal court, you set be the ultimate messenger." A breeze pushed through the cracks in the shutters, and the smoke trembled. It darted under the table, shivering. "Wind is your weakness." "Noted," she said, scribbling into her journal. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists practiced real smoke manipulation, or if these stories were allegories for incense used to carry messages via scent. Some records from 13th century Italy describe secretive fumes experiments, where smoke was guided with hidden bellows to deliver coded puffs to neighboring towers. Lena laughed softly to herself, imagining her smoke delivering a coded puff to Mira's chimney. Bring jam tarts. She grew bolder, introducing new tests. She placed a folded scrap of parchment on the floor. "Can you drag this under the table?" The smoke formed long tendrils and tugged. Slowly the note disappeared into shadow, and a faint rustle confirmed its success. "Excellent," she whispered, genuinely giddy. Then came a knock at the door, 3 quick raps. Her heart flipped. "Hide," she hissed. The smoke dissolved into nothingness so fast she could barely blink. She opened the door a crack to find old Thomas, the street's self-appointed gossip captain. "Afternoon, girl," he said, squinting. "Strange draft coming out your window earlier. Smelled like burnt honey." "Oh, that sip's just, my incense experiment," she said, pitching her voice calm, trying to ward off mice. "You know how they are." Thomas sniffed, unconvinced but too lazy to press. Well, if the bishop comes by sniffing for sin, you didn't hear it from me." "I never hear anything from you," she said sweetly, and shut the door. Behind her, the smoke recoalesced on the rafters like a guilty cloud. It pulsed once, an apologetic heartbeat. "You did fine," she said, petting the air. "But from now on, no visible tricks in daylight. We sit in cloak and dagger mode. Understood?" The smoke formed a tiny dagger shape, then wrapped it in a ribbon of smoke cloak, wobbling like a toddler with props. Lena snorted. "Perfect dramatics. You sipped fit right in at the Mummers Sips Festival." They spent the rest of the day refining the stealth practice. The smoke learned to flatten against walls, to ride air currents low to the floor, to vanish into candle smoke as a disguise. By evening, Lena leaned back against the cool stone, exhausted but satisfied. "You know," she said softly, "I think we might actually survive this. Just you and me and Mira, and maybe the occasional nosy neighbor if he doesn't sick to catch on." The smoke pulsed with a gentle glow, and for a moment, Lena swore she could feel it hum like a cat purring in the dark. Above the loft, the city went on with its life, bells ringing, bread baking, children chasing each other down narrow lanes. None of them suspected that history's quietest breakthrough was practicing cartwheels in a jar. The next morning dawned cool and bright, with the smell of wet cobblestones wafting in from the narrow street below. Lena shuffled across the loft with her hair in a lopsided braid and a cup of watered wine in hand. The smoke was already awake, swirling near the ceiling beams, which made her wonder whether it slept at all, or whether it simply waited for her eyes to open like a very polite, incorporeal roommate. "Morning, Shadow," she said in a voice soft enough to qualify as a yawn. The smoke responded with a slow spiral downward, curling near her cup as if sniffing. "You can sit, have this," she said. "Trust me. Watered wine isn't set half as fun as it smells. Learned that the hard way at the winter feast last year." She set the cup down, thinking about the next step in their mischief curriculum, secret messages. Stealth was one thing. Now they needed communication that didn't leave her ink-blotted fingers on the evidence. Lena grabbed a stick of charcoal and a small scrap of parchment. She wrote in a deliberate looping script, "If you can carry this to Mirror, thus it'll know you set are ready." She folded it tight and tied it with the tiniest bit of red thread she could find. "Okay," she said to the smoke, holding it up like a prize. "This is your first courier job. Slip through the alley, second window with the blue shutters, quiet as a ghost in soft slippers." The smoke quivered in excitement, tendrils reaching for the parchment. She let it go, and the bundle floated out through the small window gap, vanishing against the sky. And then she waited. Down on the street she could hear the wheelwright hammering, the clink of a goat's bell, and somewhere a child insisting they weren't the one who knocked over a cabbage cart. Medieval mornings had their own orchestra. It took 5 eternal minutes before a soft tap came at her window. The smoke drifted in, proudly twirling the now empty red thread. "You delivered it," she whispered. The smoke pulsed twice, forming a shape that almost resembled a triumphant thumb up. A moment later, a faint rustling on the stairwell warned her of Mira's stealth attempt. Then came the grin peeking around the door, and the inevitable hug that felt like sunshine. "You," Mira started, eyes wide with conspiratorial glee, "are doing real magic now. This isn't sit just smoke and mirrors. Well, okay, smoke, yes, but—" "Shuh," Lena said, half laughing, half terrified. "Walls have ears, probably rats, but still." They huddled over a loaf of warm bread Mira had brought. "You know," Mira said with a mouthful, "they say Roger Bacon used to send coded messages using smoke signals. Historians still argue whether it was metaphor or literal. Imagine, we sit you reenacting a secret footnote of history right here in your loft." Lena nodded, proud but cautious. "We said going to have to be smarter than Roger Bacon, though. He didn't set have old Tormas breathing down his neck." They spent the next hour rehearsing more courier exercises. The smoke learned to flatten itself to squeeze under doors and flutter through window grates. It brought back ribbon scraps from Mira's house, tiny dried violets, and once, hilariously, a startled moth that it accidentally escorted back like a stowaway. By midday, Lena felt the first tingling sense of possibility that maybe, just maybe, her dream of surviving this new bond without public bonfires might come true. Then the church bell tolled 6, and through the open window came the unmistakable sound of a stranger's boots in the alley below, slow, heavy, too deliberate for a neighbor. Mira froze. The smoke coiled like a spring near the rafters. Someone was looking for them. The footsteps didn't fade. Instead, they paused right beneath Lena's window, the rhythm of leather soles scraping against damp stone. She held her breath, and even the smoke seemed to shrink into the ceiling shadow. Mira mouthed, "Don't move." A knock came, not at the door but on the window ledge itself. 3 deliberate raps. Lena's heart galloped. Nobody knocked on windows unless they were either a close friend or a problem in boots. Slowly she crept forward and nudged the shutter open just enough to peek. A man in a dark green cloak stood below, his hood up, but she could see his jawline, clean, angular, and too deliberate in its stillness. His hand rested on a heavy leather satchel. "You're Lena, the apothecary's apprentice?" His voice was low, calm, the kind that didn't need to raise itself to be obeyed. "Yes," she said, the single syllable sticking like half-dried syrup. He glanced up and his eyes briefly caught the faint drift of smoke leaking through the window. "Good," he said simply. "I have a commission for you." Mira made a face that silently screamed. Stranger danger, but Lena felt an odd pull, curiosity mixed with the thrill of being recognized, even if vaguely. He placed a small bronze coin on the ledge. Not a normal coin. This one bore a strange alchemical symbol she only half recognized, something like a serpent biting its tail around a star. "Make a tincture that can hold a whisper for a day," he said. "Deliver it to the old clock tower by sunset tomorrow. If you succeed, there will be more work for you. If you fail, forget we ever met." Before she could even nod, he was gone, footsteps melting into the noise of the market street. Mira leaned in, whispering furiously, "You are not making a whisper potion for a random guy in a hood. That sips how spooky ballads start." "Too late," Lena said, staring at the coin. "He just paid me in alchemist currency. You probably want to know this, but only journeymen or secret guild people use these." The smoke drifted closer, forming a vague swirl like a listening ear. "All right," Lena sighed. "Looks like we set to taking the side quest." She rummaged through her supplies. Beeswax, a scrap of lead foil, rosemary, and a tiny vial of quicksilver. Actual medieval alchemists really did believe mercury could capture spirits, though historians still argue whether they meant literal ghosts or just metaphorical essences. Either way, Lena was willing to take a page from their paranoia-flavored cookbook. As she melted the wax over a low flame, the smoke drifted down to play courier again, fetching dried rose petals and a pinch of salt from the upper shelf. She murmured instructions as though narrating to an invisible audience. Step 1. Create a cozy home for a whisper. Step 2. Make it sticky enough to keep the gossip from escaping. Step 3. Don't sit. Inhale the mercury fumes, or I'll have the kind of headache that makes monks debate theology. By mid-afternoon, the first prototype was ready, a small glass vial sealed with wax and wrapped in lead foil. Lena leaned close and whispered, "If this works, I'm unstoppable," then corked it quickly. The vial felt warm, like a secret pocket of confidence. Mira stared. "And now what? You just hand it over?" The smoke coiled around the vial protectively. "No," Lena said, standing up. "We test it. Old Thomas says never deliver what you haven't set poked with a stick first." They whispered into 3 vials in total, one with a silly joke, one with a random street vendor Sip's name, and one with Lena Sip's real question for the smoke. "What are you?" Then she sent the smoke carrying the first vial to Mira's house, instructing it to release the whisper after a candle's length of time. An hour later, Mira Sip's brother burst into the loft, panting.
"Hey, did you just send someone yelling, Set?
"Your goat smells like turnips seeped through my window." Mira went red with laughter. Lena grinned. "Perfect. That means the real delivery will work." Evening came, and as the shadows stretched across the loft, Lena prepared for her first official assignment. Smoke hovered above the vials, nervous and proud all at once. Somewhere outside, the church bell rang, and Lena knew the night was about to test every ounce of her secret courage. The path to the old clock tower wound through alleys that smelled of wet hay and cabbage soup. Lena moved quietly, the 3 sealed vials tucked into her satchel, and Mira trailing behind like an unwilling squire. The smoke had wrapped itself into a tight, grey coil, almost invisible against the misty evening. "You do realize," Mira whispered, "if this is some elaborate trap, we sat her walking straight into it." "Yup," Lena said with forced cheer. "But if it isn't set, we set making history. Or, an interesting footnote that historians will still argue about." She wasn't wrong. Scholars debate whether medieval alchemists actually trafficked in spirit communication, or if it was more metaphorical, a fancy way to describe volatile gases. What Lena was doing tonight sat somewhere between superstition and science, and she was beginning to enjoy the ambiguity. The clock tower loomed ahead, its broken face pointing at nothing. Frozen in eternal surprise, pigeons flapped up as Lena approached the worn oak door, which creaked open as if expecting her. No one waited inside, only a spiraling staircase that twisted into darkness. Each wooden step groaned under her boots. Halfway up, Mira whispered. Do we have to go all the way? Lena tilted her head toward the smoke, which spiraled upward like an eager scout. Looks like yes. At the top, the clock's hollow chamber was lit by one flickering lantern. The green-cloaked stranger stood with his back to them, gazing out through a missing pane where the wind howled like a sad flute. You came, he said without turning. Lena took a steadying breath and pulled out the first vial. I did, and I brought a whisper for you. He finally turned, and she noticed a thin scar across his nose, the kind you get when you sip either fenced a lot or had very bad luck with geese. He gestured to the floor. Show me. She uncorked the first vial, and her voice, the one she'd recorded with a quick testing, can you hear this, spilled out into the air like a faint echo. Even the pigeons seemed to pause in mid-coo. The man Sip's eyes gleamed. It works. Lena held up the second vial. This one carried her whispered question. What are you? When she opened it, the air inside shivered, and the smoke leapt from her shoulder, spinning like a tiny whirlwind. For a heartbeat, the whisper didn't sound like her at all. It sounded older, hollow, almost patient. What are you? The voice asked again. The green-cloaked man leaned forward enraptured. Remarkable, he murmured. Do you know what you've just created? This is the first step to an art lost for centuries. The guild will... He stopped himself, realizing he'd said too much. Guild? Mira blurted. You mean like secret society, hood and torch guild? He smiled, not denying it. Your friend here has talent. With training, she could learn to bind more than whispers. The offer hung in the cold air, as seductive as cinnamon bread at market. But Lena Sep's attention was on the smoke, which now twisted toward her ear and hissed a single word, run. Her stomach dropped. Why? She mouthed. The smoke swirled anxiously, but the wind swallowed any further warning. The man reached into his satchel and pulled out a scroll sealed with red wax. Deliver this to the Abbey Library tomorrow. You shall be compensated, and tested further. Lena hesitated, the scroll heavy in her hands. Historians might still argue whether medieval alchemists were mere tinkerers or proto-spies, but she was starting to see why the line blurred. On the way down the tower, Mira hissed, You cert not actually going to deliver that, are you? Lena looked at the smoke, which swirled in agreement with Mira. No. First we figure out why my smoke just tried to enroll me in the Olympic sprint team. Outside, the night felt heavier than before, and every shadow seemed to twitch with intent. Somewhere far behind them, the tower's lone lantern flickered out, like a wink they weren't meant to see. The road back to Lena Sep's little workshop felt longer than usual, stretching like taffy through the dark. Mira clutched the edges of her cloak and muttered, You know I signed up to carry herbs, not scrolls that smell like treason. Lena didn't answer. The smoke hovered above her shoulder in a tight, agitated coil. Its earlier whisper, run, still echoed in her chest. By the time they reached the door of her workshop, the villagers' oil lamps were almost gone, leaving only the sliver of a moon to watch them. Inside, the familiar scent of rosemary, damp stone and faint brimstone was comforting. Lena barred the door, then set the red-sealed scroll on the table like a lump of frozen venom. Mira stared at it. So are we opening it, burning it, mailing it to the nearest king with a note that says Thea, not our problem, sit? We sit for studying it, Lena said, very carefully. She fetched a small copper mirror, angled it toward the candlelight, and held the scroll up to catch the reflection of the wax seal. Her voice softened into that sleepy host cadence she used when thinking aloud. Historians still argue whether wax seals of the 14th century hid alchemical sigils, or if that's just storybook nonsense. Let's find out. Sure enough, faint etching appeared in the reflection, a spiral with 3 dots. Spirits above, Mira breathed. That sip's the same shape the smoke makes when it sips listening. Lena Sep's heart ticked faster. She tapped the copper mirror thoughtfully. And that sip's not the weirdest part. I read once that some abbeys used parchment scraped from, unusual sources, like the skin of executed criminals. Quirky bit of trivia for your nightmares. Mira recoiled. You sich kidding. Maybe. Historians still argue. She pried the seal off with a warm spoon, careful to leave the wax intact, and unrolled the parchment. The handwriting inside was jagged, as if the quill itself had been nervous. 3 lines. The smoke chooses the listener. The tower is only the ear. The river mouth awaits the voice. Not ominous at all, Mira said, hugging herself. Are we in a treasure map or a curse? Lena traced the last line with her finger. River mouth, that could mean the estuary near the salt marshes. The smoke floated down and brushed the letters like a dog sniffing a stranger. Then, in a wisp of grey, it spelled a crude arrow pointing downward. To the cellar, Lena guessed. Sure enough, the smoke swirled approval. They descended the creaking stairs into her cramped cellar, lined with old barrels and a half-finished still. In one corner, beneath a pile of scrap wood, was the small chest she hadn't opened in years, her mother's old alchemical box. When she unlatched it, a chill seemed to roll out. Inside were 3 items: a cracked glass orb, a thin silver rod, and a slip of paper yellowed to near transparency. The note said only, "If the smoke answers, teach it your name." Mira whispered, "You never mentioned your mum left horror movie instructions." "She always said some things would make sense later," Lena murmured. "I guess this is later." She lifted the orb, and the smoke immediately pressed against it, smearing into thin, moving lines as if trying to enter. The glass trembled faintly in her hands. "Okay," Lena whispered. "My name is Lena." The smoke seeped inside the orb. For a second, nothing. Then, a faint echo filled the cellar. Her own voice, but with a delay, as if whispered through a tunnel. "Lena, Lena." Mira stumbled back. "Nope, nope, nope. This is officially where sane people leave." But Lena's fear had curved into awe. She watched the orb pulse faintly with smoky light. Suddenly, it spoke again, but the voice was not hers this time. It was deeper, fluid, like water over stone. "River mouth, soon." The orb dimmed. Lena set it down with trembling hands. "So I think we just got our next location." Mira groaned. "I knew you were going to say that. Because why sleep like normal humans when we can chase ghost smoke to the marsh in the middle of the night?" Lena cracked a tired smile. "Exactly." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled once, though no one in the village kept that hour anymore. It felt like a single warning, echoing down the centuries. The river mouth always smelled of salt and silt, and tonight it carried an extra edge, like iron warmed by the moon. Lena and Mira picked their way across the marshy path, their boots squelching with each step. Mist drifted over the water in pale ribbons, looking suspiciously like distant cousins of the smoke itself. Mira muttered through her scarf, "I want it noted that this is officially the dumbest thing I've ever done." Lena hummed, trying to disguise her nerves. "You said that last time too." The smoke orb hovered in her hands, faintly glowing. Every so often, the smoke inside pressed against the glass, like a goldfish exploring its bowl. When they reached the crooked wooden pier that jutted into the estuary, Lena stopped. "Listen," she whispered. The night had its own symphony, frogs somewhere in the reeds, the distant splash of a fish, the soft lap of tide, and then woven into it, a voice that was almost too subtle to be real. "Lena." Mira grabbed her arm. "Nope, river's haunted. We sit going home." "Wait," Lena said, leaning over the pier. The orb in her hands trembled as the smoke inside flared. "It stips trying to show me something." She dipped the orb toward the surface. The smoke flowed out in delicate tendrils, forming a spiral on the water. Slowly, the spiral stretched into a finger pointing toward a half-collapsed boathouse on the far bank. "Of course," Mira sighed. "It sips never somewhere nice. Never like Silku to the bakery, Sibate." Crossing the rickety bridge was a test of courage. Some planks were missing. Others creaked with the complaint of old wood that knew it had outlived its warranty by a century. A cold splash rose to Mira's knees when a board broke under her foot. "Historians still argue," Lena said with a weak laugh, "whether these marsh villages were abandoned because of trade shifts, or because everyone realized building here was a terrible idea." When they reached the boathouse, the smell of old tar and wet rope greeted them. Inside, moonlight fell through holes in the roof. painting the interior in jagged silver stripes, and in the center, half submerged in the mud, was a stone tablet the size of a serving tray. Carved into it was the same spiral and dots symbol. "Oh, that sip's comforting," Mira said. "Ancient secret cult stuff. I love how that keeps happening to us." Lena knelt by the stone and set the orb on top. The smoke streamed down, curling over the carvings like it was tasting them. A low hum filled the air, too soft for ordinary ears but felt in the chest. Then the mud around the tablet began to bubble. Slowly a cavity formed, spitting out something metallic and blackened. A small box, sealed with corroded hinges. Lena picked it up with trembling hands. It was surprisingly light. She pried it open and found 3 objects inside. A tarnished silver amulet shaped like the spiral. A rolled scrap of parchment tied with decayed string. A tiny stoppered vial containing what looked like liquid smoke. "That's sips. Illegal," Mira said flatly. "On some cosmic level, that has to be illegal." Lena smiled in wonder. "You Cetra looking at what early alchemists called aqua nebulae. Some claimed it was the soul of smoke itself, captured during an eclipse. Quirky, right?" "Quirky is one word," Mira muttered. "Haunting is another." She unrolled the parchment carefully. Faded letters emerged. "Speak at the river mouth. The smoke will judge." As if to confirm, the smoke in the orb slithered back out and hovered over the estuary. It spread wide, rippling like a cloak in slow motion. Then it gathered into a column that connected water to sky, forming a grey, silent beacon. Lena Sip's voice trembled. I think supposed to talk to it." She clutched the amulet and whispered into the night. "You called me here. What do you want?" The smoke trembled, then answered in its watery echo. "Not want. Choose." "Choose what?" The column of smoke split into 2 forms, one tall and jagged, the other low and coiled. They swayed like dancers caught in opposite winds. Mira gripped her shoulder. "I sipped am not an expert, but that feels like a multiple-choice question." The taller form flickered and bent toward Lena, a silent invitation. The coiled one drifted toward the riverbank. "I think," Lena whispered, "this is the next test." Lightning blinked far off over the water, and a cold wind threaded through the broken boathouse, whispering in voices she almost, but not quite, recognized. She swallowed hard and stepped forward, amulet in hand, as the smoke swirled expectantly. Lena stood at the edge of the pier, the amulet cold against her palm, the 2 smoke forms undulating before her like living questions. Behind her, Mira whispered a running commentary of pure panic. "Nope, nope, nope. This is how old ballads start right before someone disappears into a fog and gets turned into a ghost fish." Lena didn't answer. She was listening to the river. It wasn't just the usual sounds anymore. The water carried a low vibration, like the hum of a distant bell, steady enough to rattle in her ribs. She remembered an old passage she'd read once, scrawled in a forgotten codex in the Abbey Library. The smoke and the tide are twins. One rises to heaven, the other pulls to the deep. Historians still argue whether that line was metaphorical or an actual ritual instruction. She extended the amulet toward the taller, jagged smoke shape. It bent toward her hand like a reed in wind. "Maybe it's asking for a promise," Lena said softly. "Or a blood sacrifice," Mira muttered. "I vote no on both counts." The coiled smoke on the bank unspooled and drifted toward the boathouse, curling around the stone tablet like it was protecting something. A decision, then land or water, earth or air, roots or flight. Lena took a breath that felt like it went all the way to her toes. "I choose the river." The jagged form collapsed into a spiral and dived into the estuary with a muffled splash. The orb in her bag rattled violently. A plume of smoke erupted from the water, spinning upward like a reverse whirlpool. Spray misted her face, cool and sharp. Then, suddenly she felt the smoke listening, more clearly than ever before. "You will see," it whispered inside her thoughts. "But only if you breathe with us." The last time she'd inhaled smoke deliberately, she'd ended up coughing for half an hour and promising Mira she'd never try that again. But this wasn't choking haze. It was cool, silvery mist curling around her nose and mouth. She breathed in. The world blinked. She wasn't on the pier anymore, or rather, she was, but it shimmered, made of light and liquid. The river stretched in both directions like an enormous mirror, and the sky was full of drifting grey figures, hundreds of smoke shapes, each carrying tiny shards of memory. One drifted close and brushed against her arm. Images tumbled into her head. A medieval market, alchemists hawking vials of mercury and bags of crushed coral. A monk inscribing the word fumus in a manuscript. A peasant woman using smoke to cure fish by the shore. A quirky tidbit popped up too. Apparently early apothecaries sometimes recommended inhaling walnut smoke to balance the humours. No surprise that didn't catch on. Another smoke figure spiraled toward her and hissed, "Keep the seal or all paths close." She realized it meant the amulet. The silver spiral pulsed once with warmth. Then the vision fractured like a dropped plate, and she was back on the wet pier, knees shaking. Mira clutched her sleeve. "You disappeared for like 3 seconds," Mira said. "Longest 3 seconds of my life." "What did it do?" "It showed me," Lena faltered, "possibilities, histories, warnings, and it said to keep the seal." They both looked down at the amulet. Tiny beads of river water clung to the metal like dew. The smoke column had retreated to a thin, polite wisp that hovered near the pier's end, almost waiting. A soft sound interrupted the night. A boat bumping against the remains of the dock. Mira startled. We did not call an Uber canoe. An old wooden skiff had drifted up, empty but for a bundle of dry reeds. It rocked gently, like it had been tied there all along. "I think it wants us to take it," Lena whispered. Mira pinched the bridge of her nose. "Of course it does. Step 1, inhale river smoke. Step 2, steal ghost boat. Step 3, definitely get cursed forever." But they climbed in anyway, because really, what else could they do? The moment Lena touched the oar, the current caught them and began to pull them toward the dark mouth of the estuary. Behind them the boathouse groaned as if sighing, and the mist coiled back into the orb, leaving the night strangely clear. Stars burned above them with a sharp, icy brilliance. Lena glanced at the shoreline fading behind them. "We sit being led somewhere," she said, half to herself, "and for once, I think the smoke actually trusts me." Far ahead, lightning flashed again over the horizon, closer this time, illuminating a distant shape where river met sea. It was round, like a tower, and for the first time that night, Lena's stomach flipped in anticipation rather than fear. She whispered to the amulet, "Okay, let's see where this goes." The skiff glided silently, as if the river itself had taken over the rowing. Lena held the oar lightly, feeling the current tug and twist beneath her fingertips. Mira sat at the bow, hunched like a gargoyle, muttering, "This is how people end up as river legends. 2 fools in a boat, never seen again." The wind carried a briny hint now, sharper than the freshwater air of the inner river. A gull's distant cry confirmed it. The estuary was opening to the sea. Overhead, clouds thinned enough for a sliver of moonlight to silver the ripples. Then Lena noticed it. The smoke hadn't disappeared completely. It streamed like ribbons off the bow, snaking ahead in the darkness, showing them the path. Sometimes it curled into vague hand-like gestures. At one point she swore it was pointing at a clump of reeds where frogs croaked in chorus. "Why would smoke know the way?" Mira whispered. Lena considered that. In medieval alchemy they thought smoke could carry messages between elements. Historians still argue whether that was mystical belief or just poetic nonsense. But tonight, it sips hard to call it nonsense. As if in response, a smoke ribbon circled Mira's head like a laurel. Mira said, waving it off. "Do not knight me, river ghost." The boat finally nudged something solid. At first, Lena thought it was just a sandbar, but then she realized it was an old stone platform, half submerged, covered in barnacles. A crumbling staircase rose from it, leading to the round silhouette they'd glimpsed from afar. Up close, the tower was stranger than she imagined. Its stones were pocked and streaked as though fire and salt had taken turns abusing it for centuries. Half the upper level had collapsed, leaving jagged teeth against the sky. A single iron door squatted at the base, and from the cracks in its frame, thin wisps of smoke were curling out, alive, curious, almost impatient. "You first," Mira said. Lena didn't argue. Her shoes scraped the barnacled stone as she climbed out. The amulet pulsed against her chest. When she touched the iron door, it creaked open without resistance, as though expecting her. Inside was a round chamber with a floor of blackened flagstones. Shelves lined the walls, and on those shelves sat hundreds of glass vessels, each clouded with a faint swirling grey. It was like stepping into a library where every book was alive and whispering. A breeze gusted through the broken upper walls, stirring the smoke into faint shapes, faces, animals, and once something that looked like a fish in a tiny crown. A quirky historical tidbit rose in Lena's mind. Medieval fishermen once believed blowing smoke over nets could invite the souls of fish to return. She almost laughed. Maybe that crown fish was here for the joke. In the center of the room lay a raised basin of stone, and in its dry bowl sat a spiral mark identical to the amulet's design. The moment Lena stepped closer, the vessels began to hum. One by one, faint whispers filled the air. "Keeper, listener, binder of smoke." Mira hovered by the doorway. "I hate that it rhymes. Rhyming ghosts are never good news." The amulet tugged Lena's hand downward. She placed it in the basin. A vibration surged up her arms. Smoke flooded the bowl, coiling into a single dense column. It didn't rise to the ceiling. It leaned toward her, like a cobra waiting for its handler. "Speak," the smoke hissed in her head. Lena swallowed. "I sipped 'em here." I sipped 'em listened. "What do you want?" "To be free," it said, "but not to scatter. We are memory. We are warning. Keep us. Guide us. And we will answer. Fail, and the river will close its mouth forever." The weight of that sank in. She realized the orb, the amulet, the entire journey. They weren't just for her curiosity. She'd stumbled into some ancient pact between land and water, between alchemists and the living world. Lightning flared through the broken roof, and rain began to tap against the stones. The vessels rattled, and the smoke column stretched higher, tasting the wet air. Then, in a soft chorus, the smoke said something that chilled her. The last listener drowned. Mira took a step back. "Nope, nope, big nope. Let Sitz go home before we join that club." But Lena couldn't leave. Not yet. She felt the pull of the spiral, the same sensation she'd felt when inhaling the river smoke. If she left now, the pact would remain half broken. "Show me how to keep you," she said. The column pulsed once and flowed into the amulet. The spiral heated, and a stream of symbols flooded her thoughts, circles, waves, and a phrase in Old Latin she could barely translate. She knew then that the next step wasn't in this tower. It was somewhere even older, somewhere the tide touched and the air bent like a mirror. The smoke retreated into its vessels, leaving the room dim and quiet. Only the rain and Mira's nervous breathing filled the space. "Well," Mira said, voice quivering, "I think we officially become haunted relic couriers. What's SIP's step 2? Lena tightened her grip on the amulet and glanced toward the sea, where the horizon blinked with faint lightning again. "Step 2 is learning how to open the world SIP's oldest door." By dawn, the sky had cleared to a pale, exhausted blue. The estuary's mouth yawned wide, opening to a silver horizon that shimmered with the first hints of morning. Lena and Mira, perched on the slick steps of the smoke tower, shivering from damp clothes and a night spent in the company of whispering glass. The amulet was warm against Lena's palm, as if it had a heartbeat of its own now. "Did you sleep?" Mira croaked. "Define sleep," Lena muttered. "I closed my eyes and dreamt of Latin verbs trying to bite me." Mira snorted and stretched her aching arms. Classic medieval nightmare. Below, the boat bobbed gently. River water mingled with seawater, and the current carried long ribbons of kelp that trailed like hair. Lena squinted toward the distant sandbars where seabirds wheeled. She felt a tug in her mind, a gentle magnetic urging that pointed toward a low stretch of rocky shore. The smoke had shown her symbols during the night. Circles, waves, spirals. One had resembled a keyhole, half buried in sand. "Over there," she said, nodding to the rocks. "That SIP's where the old door is." Mira groaned. Couldn't sit the world sit's oldest door be in a nice dry library? The row across was slow, partly because Lena couldn't shake the surreal calm that had settled in. Every splash of the oar seemed amplified in the morning air. When they reached the rocks, the tide was already creeping up their boots. The smell of salt and wet seaweed was sharp and alive. A patch of stones formed a natural arch. Beneath it, in a shallow pool, the spiral design gleamed faintly in the wet sand. It looked exactly like the mark in the tower's basin, and the amulet's pattern pulsed brighter as Lena approached. She crouched, touched the spiral with 2 fingers, and felt a subtle warmth ripple out, even through the cold tidewater. Historians still argue, Lena murmured, whether medieval alchemists truly believed the elements were alive, or if they were just really poetic nerds. Mira peered over her shoulder. I vote alive, very alive, possibly alive, and judging us right now. A sudden gurgling noise rose from the sand. The spiral began to rotate, not physically, but as an illusion of light and shadow. Water swirled around their boots in a perfect circle. Smoke seeped from the sand, as if the earth itself were exhaling. Then with a soft grinding sound the pool deepened, revealing a descending stone stairway. Lena Thitt's jaw dropped. We just opened the Seasip's trapdoor. Mira rubbed her arms. I hate that I sipped am impressed. The steps led into a dim chamber barely taller than their heads. Its walls were carved with waves and serpentine shapes. Bioluminescent moss clung to the stone, casting a soft blue glow. In the center sat a squat pedestal, upon which rested a sphere of black glass no bigger than an apple. Smoke swirled inside it like an unending storm. Lena approached slowly. She remembered a fringe tidbit she'd once read. Some alchemists carried soul globes during coastal rituals, claiming they captured the breath of the sea. Historians dismissed it as superstition, yet here she was, staring at one that seemed very eager to meet her. She reached out, and the amulet pulsed again. Smoke spilled from the globe and wrapped her wrist, then her shoulders. It didn't choke. It clung like a shawl. Keeper, the smoke murmured, echoing in her head. Door is open. Memory flows. Bind us, and the river will remain. Lena understood. If she carried the globe and the amulet together, the smoke's memory, its voice would travel with her, no longer bound to the river alone. Is this safe? Mira whispered. No, Lena said, but it sits necessary. She lifted the globe. It was lighter than she expected, humming faintly with warmth. The pedestal's carvings glimmered briefly, and the smoke that had been trapped in the chamber flowed upward toward the open sky. She could imagine it mingling with the estuary air, joining the smoke tower's chorus. When they climbed back to the surface, the tide was rising fast. Waves lapped at the steps of the old tower. Lena felt an odd satisfaction, as if the land and water were in agreement again. Mira kicked at a piece of driftwood. So, now what? Do we get a medal? A new haunted hobby? A lifetime supply of weird dreams? Lena watched the smoke spiral into the dawn sky, forming the faint shape of a key. We get a responsibility, she said softly. This isn't sept ending yet. The smoke listens to us now, but it expects us to listen back. The gulls cried overhead, and the river's mouth shimmered like a liquid mirror. Lena could almost hear the water whispering her name, urging her inland, back to the little cottage where her journey had begun, because the final conversation with the smoke had yet to happen. By the time Lena and Mira stumbled back into the clearing, the world had tilted into late afternoon, that soft hour when the sun hovers just low enough to gild every branch and ripple in the river. It wasn't a triumphant return so much as a careful one. Their boots squelched in damp earth. Their cloaks clung to them, perfumed with a cocktail of soot, marsh water, and river reed. The smoke tower loomed behind them, but now its breath was different, gentle puffs, a cat dozing rather than a dragon on guard. Lena's arms ached as she clutched the black glass globe to her chest. It thrummed faintly, no longer the harsh, jittering vibration that had rattled her teeth in the workshop. Instead, it purred like a distant bumblebee, as though the smoke itself had grown sleepy after its long, uncanny dialogue. The amulet, once so insistent, rested against her skin with the contented warmth of a stone sun soaked all day. Do you think it's over? Mira asked, lagging half a step behind. Her braid had come loose. A stray feather from the riverbank was caught in it, making her look like a bird who'd just returned from a battle. Lena considered the question and didn't answer right away. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists believed in finality at all, or whether every experiment was just the beginning of something subtler. She let that thought drift, listening instead to the quiet hum under her fingertips. When they reached the cottage, the door moaned like an old friend letting out a relieved sigh. Inside, the air was layered with warmth and thyme. Dried thyme and sage hung above the hearth, catching a sliver of light. The small window let in a patch of sun that turned the dust motes into lazy golden snow. Lena set the globe on the oak table in the center of the room. It wobbled slightly, then settled. The amulet she placed beside it. For a moment, the objects seemed to exchange some silent greeting, a faint glimmer in the glass, a tiny shiver in the metal. Smoke, thin, deliberate, rose from the globe and curled toward Lena's ear. "Keeper," the smoke whispered, gentler than it had ever been. "We listen." Mira sank into the nearest chair, which creaked under her weight. "If it starts spouting riddles again, I'm leaving you to it," she muttered, but her eyes were soft, half-lidded. "It sits not a riddle," Lena said. "It sits a question. It sits waiting for me to answer. Then answer and let 6 call it a day." Lena touched the globe with both hands, feeling its warmth seep into her chilled fingers. She spoke quietly, more a sigh than a declaration. "Protect this river, this house. Let the smoke pass in peace, and let us have peace in return. Let the world keep forgetting this place, but let it survive. Let the world keep forgetting this place, but let it survive." The smoke twined higher, coiling like a contented cat brushing along the rafters, before settling again, a shimmer, a subtle one, as though sunlight had briefly bent around the walls, trickled through the room, and then stillness. Mirasep's head lolled to one side. "Is it blessing us, or just, digesting our request?" Lena smiled faintly. "Both." She pulled the cracked journal of the old alchemist from the shelf and laid it beside the globe. Pages fanned open to a series of curling diagrams. Now, after all these sleepless nights, the strange notations made sense. The swirls weren't merely ornamental, they were sentences in the smoke's own script. She traced a finger over one illustration, remembering a fringe tidbit she'd read in a forgotten footnote. Some alchemists believed their most successful experiments could sing back in shapes rather than sound. She chuckled softly to herself. "You were right all along," she whispered to the absent mentor whose scrawl filled the pages. Taking a slow breath, Lena recited the closing lines she had pieced together from both the journal and the smoke's whispered corrections. Latin syllables mingled with soft hums, the cadence like a lullaby carried on river mist. The globe pulsed with each phrase, and at the final syllable it gave a long, low exhale of smoke that rolled across the table like a velvet cloth. The cottage itself seemed to respond. The floorboards, usually creaky and petulant, relaxed into silence. The last few embers in the hearth shifted with a soft crack, sending up a friendly plume of orange. Outside, a heron cried once along the bank, as if marking the moment for some secret ledger of the wild. Mira snored softly in her chair. A smile crept over Lena's face, uninvited but unstoppable. The tension that had coiled between her shoulder blades for weeks finally released. She wasn't sure if the smoke would always guard them, or if the pact would fade like dream logic at dawn, but for now the cottage felt safe. She let that be enough. A small curl of smoke rose from the globe and drifted toward the rafters, hesitating only long enough to brush the dried herbs. A gentle perfume bloomed thyme, sage, and the faintest echo of river silt. Then the smoke vanished. Lena stretched out on the floor near the table, watching light and shadow mingle on the ceiling. She imagined tomorrow, washing soot from her hands in the river, boiling nettle soup for Mira, scolding the neighbor's goat when it inevitably returned to trample the herb patch. Ordinary, stubborn life, except now the river and the smoke were conspirators in keeping it safe. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she slept without fear, wrapped in the soft hum of a world that for tonight was entirely at peace. The cottage is quiet now. Every creak has settled into stillness, and the only sound left is the soft murmur of the river beyond the door. A silver ribbon of water moves through the darkness, carrying away the day. Inside, the air is warm and layered with familiar comfort. Dried thyme and sage hang in bundles along the rafters, their scent faint but steady, like a memory you can lean against. The last of the smoke curls lazily from the globe on the oak table. Its glow is a patient, steady pulse, neither bright nor dim, but exactly enough to feel like someone is keeping watch. Mira shifts in her chair and lets out the smallest sigh. She is deep in the first soft layers of sleep. Her head tilted, braids slipping over her shoulder. Even her breath has taken on the rhythm of the room, slow and tidal. You can almost feel yourself sinking to it. The quiet rise and fall of a peaceful chest, the whisper of fabric brushing wood as her body relaxes completely. The world outside is hushed. No wind stirs the branches. No footsteps crack the underbrush. Even the animals seem to understand that tonight is meant for rest. Somewhere in the distance an owl calls once, a single low note that drifts through the trees and dissolves into the night. It is the kind of sound that reminds you the world is alive, but not urgent. Beneath you, the floor is warm from the day's sun and the residual heat of the fire. You can imagine lying down, letting your weight sink into the planks, feeling them hold you effortlessly. There is nothing sharp here, nothing waiting for you to respond. The house, the river, the smoke, they all agree this is a place of release. Your eyes wander to the ceiling beams. Shadows from the low firelight make soft patterns, curved and shifting, like the reflection of water on stone. A lone dust mote drifts through the glow, catching light for a heartbeat before it disappears. Time slows in places like this. The night isn't something to move through, it's something that drapes over you like a warm quilt, asking nothing in return. If you close your eyes now, you can still imagine the river speaking in its quiet language. It says, "You are safe." It says, "The day has done its work. You have done enough." Every bubble and swirl in its current is a lullaby for anyone willing to listen. It takes away the noise that clings to you, worries, lists, echoes of conversations, and carries them downstream where they become small and then smaller until they are gone. Breathe in once, slowly, feel the warm herbal air fill your lungs, carrying with it the earthy scent of wood, smoke, and river moss. Hold it for a soft heartbeat, then let it go. You may notice your shoulders drop without thinking about it, your jaw loosening, your hands resting more heavily wherever they are. Somewhere, the globe gives a faint exhale of smoke. It drifts upward like a cat, stretching, brushing the dried herbs as it rises. The smell is soft and green, with a hint of earth after rain. The smoke pauses near the rafters, curls in on itself like a question mark, and then disappears. The room accepts this without comment. Outside, the stars have taken their places. You can imagine opening the cottage door and stepping onto the cool earth. The sky is impossibly deep, a velvet sea with pinprick lights scattered across it. The moon hangs low and kind, and its reflection wavers in the river, as if the world is holding a mirror up to the heavens. You don't need to go outside to feel it, though. You can picture the cool air brushing your face, hear the grass whisper under a gentle night breeze, sense the river's unending conversation with the stones. The whole landscape is humming a single idea: rest now. Your breathing matches the rhythm of this place without effort. In and out, in and out. Each inhale brings you a touch of night air and the memory of the day's warmth. Each exhale lets go of something you don't need to carry. Thoughts that feel heavy are like leaves on the current. They lift, spin once or twice, and then float quietly out of reach. The night deepens, but not in a way that shuts you out. It deepens the way a lullaby deepens as you drift closer to sleep, notes stretching into soft hums. The fire gives one last crack, and a coal sighs. That's the language of a house content, with its guests. Imagine yourself smaller now, lighter. Imagine the world's edges softening around you. The walls of the cottage fade into a gentle blur. The oak table, the globe, the slumbering mirror, they're all still there, but they exist in a kind of suspended calm, waiting for morning without urgency. Outside, the river accepts the moon's reflection and keeps flowing. A mist rises from its surface, moving the way dreams move, slow, deliberate, unconcerned with time. If you were to step into that mist, It would wrap you in cool threads and carry you wherever peace waits for you tonight. You notice the smallest sounds now, the rustle of a mouse in the thatch, the distant creak of a tree, adjusting under the weight of night air, the occasional drip from the roof into the damp earth below. None of it startles. It is all part of the lullaby, the background music of a world in balance. Let yourself imagine sleep as the smoke itself, soft, curling, unhurried. It comes to you, brushes against your cheek, and then wraps around you in a delicate spiral. It has no weight, and yet you feel cocooned. In this state, even your own thoughts are gentle. If a memory appears, it doesn't demand attention. It floats past like a boat on the river. If a stray worry drifts in, it lands like a feather, then slides away with the current. You don't have to hold or fix anything. Everything slows further. Breath, heartbeat, the small movements of your fingers or toes, even the awareness of the room itself becomes softer, as if the cottage and the river and the night sky are tucking you in together. You feel safe, you feel done, the day has emptied itself, and you have emptied yourself with it. The last thing you notice is the smell, a blend of smoke, sage and riverstone. It is the scent of a story coming to rest. And in that scent, with that slow breath, and under that velvet night you drift into sleep, as the river hums and the world watches over you, patient and still.